Bootstrap for forms and inputs. Bootstrap for form layout. Bootstrap provides two types of form layouts. These are the stack or the full width form and the inline form. Bootstrap for form example. So the following example creates a stack form with two input fields and one checkbox and a submit button. So we add a wrapper element with a form group class around each form control to ensure proper margin. So the code will be on the next page. So here we have our form. So form, then the action, this will be the file that will be open if we submit this form. And then we have here now our label. So label, then for email, that's the ID. Then we have the input type email. So what's important here is that the class that we use is form control. Then maybe placeholder ID email, and we wrap both of these inside the division with the form group control. And then here the same, but all this time the type is password. And here also the same, but this time we have here form check. So we added form check because this is a checkbox. And then label class form check labeled. Then the class is not just form control but form check input. So that's for a checkbox. Then we have here now our button. So this is an example of a form. So the appearance will be something like this. We stack form. So we have the prompt, the label, and then we have here the control, the input box, then password, and then another input box. And then we have here the checkbox with the caption, and then we have the submit button. So that will be the appearance of our form. So this is a stack form. Now we also have the Bootstrap inline form. In an inline form, all of the elements are inline and left aligned. Note, this only applies to forms within viewports that are at least 576 pixels wide. On screens more than 576px, it will stack horizontally. Additional rule for inline form, add the class form inline to the form element. So as an example, so if you're going to look at the code, almost all similar, but we did not wrap these two with form group because we don't need the margins. So, but this one we use the class form check, and in the previous one there are two classes here. We have the form group and then form check. So it is similar with the previous one, except that we removed the form group wrapper. And what we added here is the class form inline. So the result will be something like this. So we have here the text box, the prompt, the text box, or the label, and then another input box, and then we have the checkbox, and then the prompt, and then we have here submit. Now of course you can make this a lot better by placing margins. So by using the utility margins of Bootstrap, like ML, that's margin left, or MR, margin right, or maybe we can use MX, so margin both left and right. So that's all for forms. Now let's proceed to BS4 input. So Bootstrap input. So Bootstrap supports all the HTML5 input types. These are text, password, date time local, date, month, time, week, number, email, URL, search, telephone, and caller. So BS input example. The following example contains two input elements, one of type text and one of type password. As we mentioned in the form chapter or our previous slides, we use the form control class to style inputs with full width and proper padding, etc. So the code will be next on the next slide. So this is an example. So we have the label for USR, the ID, and then we have the class form control. And then we wrap this inside form group class so that it will provide to us the necessary margins. Then password, so the same label for, and then input type equals password, class equals form control. So we have here now our form. We also have the text area. So how do we create a text area? Again, we have the wrapper class, form group, then label for comment, and then so instead of input form, we use text area slash text area. Then we can specify the number of rows. Then again, class form control and the ID of the element. For checkboxes, checkboxes are used if you want the user to select any number of options from a list of preset options. The following example contains 3 checkboxes. The last option is disabled. So this one is disabled. So we have 3 options and the last one is disabled. So what will be our code? So we use input checkbox. And instead of form group, we use form check. And the label, we use form check label. So in an ordinary form, we just use what? So none. We just use 4. And then here, for checkboxes, we use form check label. And then we have here now the input checkbox with the class form check input. Then the value, option 1, etc. So the same is true with this and another with this, but this time we just placed or added the disabled attribute to disable this checkbox. So inline checkboxes. For inline checkboxes, we just use the form check inline class if you want the checkboxes to appear on the same line. So just like in this case. So instead of just this one, we just added this wrapper class. So form check inline. So let's try to compare that with the previous one. So the previous one, we use form check, form check, form check. But for this one, we use form check and then just add the dash inline. So dash inline, dash inline. Then that's all. That's what's different with this from the previous example. Then we also have radio buttons. Radio buttons are used if you want to limit the user to just one selection from a list of preset options. So that's the difference with the checkbox. With the checkbox, you can select more than one, but for radio buttons, you can only select one. So the following example contains 3 radio buttons. The last option is disabled. So here we have 3 radio buttons and the last one, you notice the color is different. It's quite pale. So that's a disabled radio button. So to do that, we have form check. So the same form check, form check, form check input, but this time type here is radio. So similar with the checkbox, but the type is different. So type radio, then we place here disabled and disabled. So we disable both the label and control itself. Okay, so again, let's try to compare it with this one. Almost the same, except for type. So almost the same, except for type. So we just use type radio. For inline, so with checkboxes, use the form check inline class if you want to radio buttons to appear on the same line. So the same with a checkbox. So instead of just form check, we use form check inline. Again, the previous one it's just form check. Here it's form check inline. So that's all to make this form inline. We also have the Bootstrap for Select List. The select lists are used if you want to allow the user to pick from multiple options. So its appearance is similar to this one. It's like a text box, but we have here an arrow or a button. And so once we click, you can have here several options, and you can select. So you can hold Control or Shift or drag with the mouse to select more than one. So example, so we have form group, then label for this label, so the same with the previous input controls. Then instead of input, we use select class, then ID, then these are the options. These are the these are a list of options that we can and that can be selected by the user. So select and then slash select, and inside select slash select we have the options. Form control sizing. So you may control the size of the form using this class. We have form control SM for small size form controls, and form control LG for large form controls. So by default, it's the medium size. So we can have small and large. So how do you do this? Same, but instead of just form control, we add form control SM, form control only. Or actually, we can just remove this one, and form control LG for large. Form control plain text. We can use the form control plain text if you want to style the input field as plain text. So just like in this case, this one is the normal form control. This one, it appears just like a text, but once you click on this, then the border will now appear just like ordinary text box. So that's a form control plain text. It appears like a plain text. Again, it appears like a plain text, but once you click on this, then you will see the border, and you can now type the value of the particular control. So we have also form control file and range. So we add the form control range, class to input type range, or form control file to input type file to style a range control or a file field with full width. So input type range, so just like in this case, input type equals range, then class form control dash range. So the appearance will be something like this. Or we have input type equals file, then class form control file. Then we just added border to place borders on this text box. So these are examples of form controls. Now let's have a very brief example. So let's say we have this was our dialog last time. So let's save that to a new file, and let's call that modal form demo.html. So I'm going to remove this one. Inside the body, and this one we use this as maybe another button. Please just copy this one, but instead of button danger, we use button primary, and maybe this one is saved. And then our form, so we place here form, and then url.html here. So let's say that will be the file to be open if we submit the form. And then we have here /form. So be sure that because this one ends here and I place form outside the modal content, so my slash form should also be outside. Okay, and then here we place our controls. So I'm going to copy this one for purposes of brevity or to make my demo short. So I'll just copy and then paste that inside my modal form. Okay, I'll first place tab so that I can have proper indentation. So I have for now my email address, my password, and my checkbox. So again, inside the form group to ensure proper margins. So you save this file and then launch in Chrome. So once I click on this, here's now my form. Okay. I think the model is centered. Yeah, so that's our model form. So it's centered and scrollable. So that's the appearance of our form. Of course, we can make that. We can change the size of our model dialog. You can view our model video. So that's an example. So we have here the text box. We have the password. So if for type password, of course, the characters will be hidden, and then we can have our checkbox. So that's our form. Okay, so thank you for